You've probably heard of red teaming exercises that try to exercise organizations' security, but what value do red team exercises provide for security awareness programs? That's what we'll be exploring in today's fascinating cybersecurity awareness forum session. Today, we'll have a special guest whom I'll introduce in a moment, but I want to let you know that this is our 41st live Cybersecurity Awareness Forum. It's the open collaboration group for anyone who's passionate about security awareness and human risk management. I'm Scott Wright, the CEO of ClickArmor and Chief Engagement Officer, and I'm very happy to say that ClickArmor makes all of this possible. So, as usual, I'm joined by an elite group of panelists, so let's meet them now. My special guest today is Mr. Tom Eston. He's a veteran application security testing professional with over 17 years of experience in InfoSec and has been vice president of consulting at Bishop Fox for the last 3 years. And he's focused on not offensive, offensive. You do offensive things, Tom.
Yeah.
Offensive security services, including oversight of the red team offerings. So, who better to have in this session? Tom's a former pen tester, was a red teamer for close to 10 years. And of course, you may know Tom from being the primary host, I'll call him, where I co host the Shared Security podcast. We've done 230 some episodes since 2009. So, welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Scott. It's a total honor to be on your webcast today to talk about a subject I really love, which is red teaming.
Excellent. So the other panelists we have include Erin Gallagher, who's been working in the security industry, security awareness field for 5 years. She's helped build programs for companies ranging from 1,200 employees to 500,000. Erin has a true passion for maintaining human connection in all things security and awareness. Welcome, Erin. And we have Fleetus Poston, who is a seasoned IT and security professional, currently a security operations manager. And beyond his expertise, he finds immense joy in sharing his passion for cybersecurity with others. We also have Thea Mannix, who's a behavioral neuroscientist with over 10 years of experience in studying how the biology of our brains can influence our behavior. And in her current role as director of research at Praxis Security Labs, Thea now works on applying her experience to cybersecurity scenarios surrounding the human element. And who does that leave us with? Must be
Just me, I
Jim.
think.
Must be Jim. Jim Guckin is a 20-plus year veteran in the information technology and information security field. He's worked for many different organizations in many industries. He's currently a senior vice president of digital security operations at Customers Bank and hosts a weekly cybersecurity news podcast of his own. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, now that we've got that all over with, I just wanted to remind people, if you can, please type in the chat where you're coming from around the world. Looks like we got some really good international participation today. And I'll ask the panelists to please monitor the chat because I don't have time to check everything out. But definitely feel free to highlight things that people are mentioning. And everybody do enter any comments or questions you've got as we move along. So with that, a little bit of housekeeping we do often, but you'll see this if you catch the recording. You'll see all these details later on. We generally record these sessions, transcribe them, create quarterly industry reports, and we also post and share a lot of information on the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum website. It's a community site. We'd welcome anybody to join. So let's get into our session today. We've got a few context slides as usual. First of all, just if anybody's noticed, Ryan is absent today. Unfortunately, he wasn't feeling well, so I'm taking over for him. I might not do it as well as he's done it the last little while, but all this is his great work, just putting together a bit of context. And I'll ask Tom to jump in at any time, or anyone who wants to make a comment on anything here that might need to be highlighted or even corrected. So what is a red team exercise? A red team exercise is like a practice attack on an organization, testing the processes, the skills, and perhaps the vulnerabilities of different parts of the organization for management to better understand things. And we do this because it provides a realistic threat assessment sort of methodology and does some proactive risk, allows us to do some proactive risk mitigation. So if we start to see things in these exercises, we can fix them before we actually hit a real attack. And that includes things like fixing our incident response processes, which may seem good on paper, but maybe don't always work the best they can. So I'm going to just turn it over to Tom for a moment just to see if he has any observations or things that he'd like to point out as we start.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, one of the big things, and I think is a misconception about red teams, that they are just like a normal penetration test. And that is a kind of a big misconception because nowadays I see a lot of people just calling any type of pen test or security assessment, oh, that's a red team. And that is not true at all. A real red team engagement, in the context of breach and attack simulation, as kind of Scott has described, is really taking a security assessment to the next level. And we really like to talk about real red teaming being reserved for organizations that have a very mature security program. So one of the things we do, like at Bishop Fox, we tell people all the time, an organization may not be ready for a red team engagement because a red team is really simulating a specific threat or a specific scenario for an organization that really wants to test their defenses. And that could be a multiple of things, So we see a lot recently where it's ransomware. They want to simulate how is my organization going to handle a ransomware attack or say an attack from a nation state actor, which requires a lot more skill, a lot more time, and frankly, a lot more money to do an engagement like that. Um, and there's oftentimes we'll tell clients, listen, it sounds like you need more of like a standard external penetration test, or maybe you want to do some social engineering or, some other types of simulations, not to the scale of a red team. And maybe eventually, when your program gets ready for it, you're then ready for that red team engagement. But for the organizations that are ready for a red team engagement, there are definitely scenarios that apply around the security awareness front.
Hmm.
And I have lots of stories just over the years of I've seen great examples of how red team engagement can really enhance the security awareness of an organization. And I've also seen it where it's gone completely wrong
All right. I want to hear
and
some of those stories.
even, cause damage in some ways and a lot of controversy. So yeah, it's all over the place.
That's cool. Yeah, thanks very much, Tom, for that. And before we get into the roundtable discussion, I'll go quickly back to our chat and see where people are coming from today. We've got Fleetus in North Carolina, obviously Denver, Philadelphia, Oslo, Norway, Cleveland, New York, Ottawa, myself, Turkey, thank you, and Toronto, Canada, more in Colorado, and Birmingham. Uh, so that's awesome. Great coverage here today. And but just to let Tom know, he's probably one of the few who hasn't been on the panel here before. We like to do a poll, a combination of poll questions and then open questions for the panel. So I'm going to start our first poll, and I'll share my screen as well. First, get that going. There we go. And here we are. So the first poll question is, have you been directly involved in planning or analyzing red team exercises? So this will be interesting because, a lot of the people who join this session, it's a broad sort of background of people. We get security awareness managers, of course, but we also get CISOs and security operations people. So it'll be interesting to see how many people who are in this session have actually participated in one of those exercises. So I'll let that run for a little while, and then we'll go to our first question. And feel free to, interpret the question however you want. Go take it wherever you want. This is really just to generate valuable discussion. I'm not trying to hijack the thing. So I'd like to start with a question of who should be part of the red team planning process for the most successful exercises. So can I let you start on that, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question because, like I mentioned, we're talking about organizations typically that are very mature in their security programs. So The most successful ones we've seen are when we have executive level support for the exercises. So typically that's going to be the CISO. And in some cases, I've even seen that beyond the CISO, where other C-level executives are also aware or want involvement in planning or thinking about what the goals are of their red team exercise. But sometimes we don't get that level of involvement, and that's okay. So it sometimes can trickle down to maybe the VP or director level, but the most successful ones are when we get more support from executive management, because to me, that tells me that we have a culture here in an organization from the top down that really sees the value in what we're about to do or what we're about to propose with a red team exercise.
Yeah, it's great ideas in terms of things people might not have thought about. We do talk lot about getting top level support, obviously, in getting a successful security awareness program. So it's not really a surprise that it certainly does help on the red teaming if you can get executive support as well. Fleetus.
Yeah, just to go with Tim's comments, depending on the size of your organization, you may bring in a red teamer as part-time, full-time to give you the opportunity to test out these opportunities. So I've been in organizations where we've had a full-on internal red team. And at that point, you're getting legal involved, you're getting your compliance team involved, because at that point, they're employees who are now taking actions that may not be part of your EULAs. So you've got to get those employees a statement of work that allows them to circumvent the policies that you would normally allow your security awareness manager to enforce. So now you've got that aspect of the job when you have an FTE or a contractor who's now has an internal creds, has a desk, has the ability to physically walk your environment, who's doing red team activity. So you got to look at that lens too. If you give them physical access, what are you allowing them to do? And what is their change control process? What does their documentation process look like? Because you don't want your red team just to start red teaming, because it can get very
Yeah.
loose and very political very quickly. I've got stories like Tom, very similar, where
Yeah.
a red team did decide to take things in their own hands and became more gray than white hat red teaming. And it caused some insider issues that we had to address. So there's plenty of stories that we can share. But just to go back again, make sure if you are going to hire them on as a contractor or an FT, that you make sure that your legal, your compliance team, as well as your security awareness team, is aware that they're on staff and what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, as well as the security operations center, because you're going to get into that purple team, which I shared a link in the chat, is where they need to be really sitting. If you really have a red team on staff, it needs to be more of a purple team engagement versus a true red team engagement.
Cool. I'm going to let Jim and anybody else who wants to just chime in on this first question, and then I might turn it back over to anyone who wants to tell a story. Tom said he's got some, Fleetus has some, so we'll just open it up at that point. But Jim, you mentioned you have a comment?
Yeah, so I think to Tom's point, you have to make sure that your organization is ready for a real red team. And like Thomas said, there's a lot of people who confuse that term red teaming with vulnerability management or adversary emulation. And so to have the proper people at the table depends on what kind of red teaming you're doing. So in my organization, we have tabletops, we have adversary emulations, we have pen testing, internal and external. But like Fleetus mentioned, one of the people on my staff is my red teamer. So, I sit down with him on a regular basis. What are we going to try? And you have to be cautious. And like Fleeta said, there's legal involved, there's EULAs involved. And to a degree, even system owners have to be somewhat aware of what's going on. Um, but you walk a thin line. I think when you're doing real red teaming, I don't want to go to a system owner and go, hey, I'm going to hack your box. Be prepared for it. Nor do I let the SOC, who is also underneath me in my organization, know about it either, because I need to see their response. So it's funny. I have a member of my team who doesn't necessarily talk to the rest of my team because I want to see what their reactions are. I want to see what my incident response team, how they react to this, how the SOC detects it. And then we kind of get into at the end of a red teaming, I want to say session because it's a person who's hired. He does it all the time. I then come back and try to do a purple team like, hey, here's what the red teamer did. Here's the documentation they did. Here's the systems they hit. Here's the tactics they used. SOC, what did you see? What did you not see? What alerts can we do to kind of catch this? So it's like this really weird line when you're doing real good red teaming where you don't want to inform too many people, but you also don't want to inform no one because then you can run into issues. And like I'm sure Fleetus and Tom have run into, when you do red teaming, you do it to test a system, but at the same time, every once in a while, you accidentally break that system. You never intended to. You were just like, hey, I was just scanning in the ports and it crashed. But I think people need to understand too, like that is a finding for a red team. Like if I was just scanning your box and it broke, that's a problem. And I've also loved sometimes when I've done red teaming in the past where people are like, yeah, you can't scan this system because you'll break it. Well, that's the problem. Like that's would you expect hackers to go, hey, please don't scan this box because you're going to break it? You know, like those are things in an organization. If you're aware that even testing
Yeah,
on the lightest end is going to break it, is a bad sign.
that's
And
it's
I want to point out, Scott, right before I
yeah.
give it back to you. Ironically, I forgot about the this call today, and I just happened to be wearing a red team shirt.
How ironic.
That's funny. It's amazing that you said that about, well, the attackers won't respect, your busy groups or people that are too brittle, right, to attack. Because same thing with phishing simulations, live phishing simulations. When you say, well, you can't attack the help desk or impersonate the help desk because they're too busy and everybody's going to overwhelm them, right? Like that's exactly the point in some cases when you're doing this. So if Thea or Aaron don't have any other questions or comments to add, I'm going to just turn it back over to Tom. Wondering, Tom, if you could describe for people who are not on right now or who have not uh, really understood what a red team does, maybe you could take us through the timeline of what actually happens in a red team exercise for just in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, certainly. Kind of to both points I've just heard, one of the first thing obviously is scoping and rules of engagement, right? And that is probably the most important part of a red team engagement and getting that right. And I'd say, especially if there is any type of physical security or buildings or any of those physical things that are involved, because then you run into the risk of you're treading on waters of like social engineering and building security in a lot of cases. And people with guns or dogs are usually the two things that you want to make sure are like covered. And that's where you're getting legal involved. You're getting executives. Like there's some very serious things. And I've had a situation when I was running a red team where we had an individual that was pretending to be a bank auditor, go into a bank branch in a very small remote town, and the teller got suspicious of one of my red teamers in the bank branch and hit the silent alarm. And the cop showed up. This is the local sheriff. Keep in mind, this is a small town, and didn't really care that we had a get out of jail free letter, that the CISO signed it, or any of those things. And he's up against the police car with a gun pointed at him. And that is an escalation that sometimes we don't think about, especially if we're testing a financial institution. Everything turned out okay, by the way, in that situation. But again, a very scary situation. There was another case, I think it was in the news a couple of years, about a pen testing firm that had two individuals arrested because they were testing a courthouse, which they were authorized to do, but the communication somehow broke down between the state and the local jurisdiction. And literally they were in jail and had to go to court and had to get lawyers, and this judge was ready to throw the book at them. So like there's cases like these, and like I mentioned, the scoping piece, it's just so important that you're getting that right and you're covering all those bases. And then planning out that field work, the timelines, all of those things. Red team engagements typically take a lot longer. Typically, ours are at least 30 days or sometimes longer, depending on the type of engagement. There's usually a long reconnaissance phase. There's a lot of scoping in terms of, or casing the joint, as we like to call it, right? With buildings and satellite imagery. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it, depending on the scope, depending on the threats that we're trying to emulate. But it's very critical that you're getting that first phase right before any field work.
Awesome. Aaron, you got a comment?
Quite literally just a comment to add on to Tom, not to take away from your podcast, but a lot of these stories go into depth on Darknet Diaries. So if anybody wants
Yes,
more about those,
absolutely.
one of the best podcasts, especially
Mhm.
if you're like myself and not necessarily the most technical person. From a narrative perspective, it goes into a lot of those details. And as you were talking, Tom, I was like, I heard that story before, and I'm wondering
Yeah.
where I heard it.
Yep.
And they have a lot of those pen tests where communication does break down. And there are some uncomfortable situations, to say the least.
Yep. Actually, Tom made me think of one where I think we had a podcast episode where we interviewed Jason,
Street.
Jason Street. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think he was doing a bank.
Yes.
He was hired to do a bank red team thing in
Lebanon.
Lebanon. He ended
Yeah.
up not finding out until later, but he actually had penetrated the wrong bank.
The wrong bank. Yeah. It was bad.
Jim.
Yeah, so to go on Tom's thing, one of the things that when you decide or you do a red team, and it kind of goes to that story, is people don't always know who owns what. And I've been caught in the scenario where I was doing it for a government entity, and they gave me permission. I had everything in line, and luckily it didn't end up in horribly. I did have a cop called on me, and I did have to explain it to him, but it was not the jurisdiction who hired me who owned the building. It was actually owned by a different jurisdiction. So, and even though all the due diligence, me and the company I worked for at the time went through, and we had all this stuff in line, people don't necessarily know. Go, oh yeah, I'm just going to test, and everything's fine. And yeah, do you own the building? And you have these, checklist questions that you ask a client, like, hey, can I break in? Can I do this? Can I, so in the scope of engagement, sometimes people just miss things. And I want to say partially that's part of the thrill of real red teaming. But I also want to point out the Tom's thing is when people get into red teaming, you think of the breaking in and the hacking, and that's all the cool stuff
The
you
fun
get to
stuff,
do.
yeah.
No one talks about the
Mhm.
hours you spend in legal or the scoping calls, and you're just like,
Or
this
the
is
handcuffs.
this is not what I signed up for. And as it's scary when you have a security guard catch you, or you have a police officer called on you, and you walk out the building and there they are, they catch you, and you hope. Everyone has that hope when you first reach in and go, hey, here's my get out of jail free card. Look, the CISO said you can call him. But you also have to make sure that people on that call list can respond. Because I've had a scenario where the CISO of an organization was like, yeah, you're doing it on this day. I'm fine. I'll be there. And then when the police officer went to call and the building security went to call, he was either in a spot where he couldn't be reached or whatever. And that was the scariest 2 hours of my life when I got dragged down to the police station getting ready to be processed, where, but you're paying me to do this. But but it's the thrill. It's honestly, people who do it, there's a thrill in getting where you shouldn't get. But I just want people to know there's not always a sexy side to it. There's the documentation, there's the hours you spend either scoping the building out or looking on Google Maps or finding where people smoke. All that stuff goes into it, but it's what your adversaries are going to do. And to tie it back into, the topic is, these are the things that after a pen test, or I'm sorry, after a red teaming, you go back and you go, all right, what can we learn from this? If all the smokers are out on the one side of the building, are they making sure that everyone comes back in is someone who has a badge? And you have to bring that into your training programs. It's not, flawless. People are always your biggest flaw in your security program, whether it's phishing emails or even a red teaming exercise.
Mhm.
But as long as you go through and go, hey, here's what we learned. How do we do it better?
Yeah. Cletus, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I want to go off of what Aaron just said as well as Tom. Like the Darkroom Diaries, the latest one right here is with the one of the more prominent social engineers at our US right now. So, like
Rachel
what she
Chobek.
shared this week
Mhm.
is stuff that's easily repeatable. And for security awareness, let's tie it back to our partner here. Those are things that they can easily do, because if you watch this recent one, she talked about M&A activity. She literally posed as a project manager, interviewed, ended up getting a job offer. just to get recon to figure out how they were leaking M&A activity. So from a security awareness point of view, sharing what you can and cannot talk about in an interview process, even if it's like if you're just using hints, like don't even use the hints, don't even talk about the tools, don't talk about the process, don't talk about the technology when you're interviewing, which is hard because you want to make sure that the individual you're interviewing knows enough about your environment to be a good fit, but you also have to stop answering questions. That's the social engineering aspect of red teaming or pen testing that's easily done. I will admit, I have purposely taken interviews with competitors just to learn what technology they're doing, and they freely tell me on the call. It's just so and it wasn't even malicious. I just wanted to know what a vendor I should evaluate, what a vendor I should not use, and why. And I found that out during the interview process on the blue team side of the house. Just think about what the information I could have took as a red teamer or a purple teamer, and I did it purely for blue team. I just wanted to know if this vendor has any validity. Do they have any salt? Can they play? Can they respond? Can they have the ability to respond? Like I have met the other end of a gun, but I was on a blue team engagement. I wasn't even a red team engagement. I was trying to do activities in a data center and I tripped the door alarm. I met said armed guard who wanted to know why I was in there doing my work.
And you probably didn't have a letter.
No, I was literally there on a change room. I was just doing a scheduled change and they wanted to know why I was in the building at random hours of the night to do work.
Cool. Aaron.
Saying everyone's really sneaky on here. Oh, just going off of what Fleeters was saying too, you know, and I think we'll probably come to this. Like I work in the security awareness side of it. And what I think is really interesting is that this kind of narrative from everything is super important to then be transparent to the rest of the employees to talk about things like not just the interview side of it, but you know, we have issues with social media all the time. Don't put what tech stack you work with like in your LinkedIn profile. So a lot of the content that comes from, you know, these stories of, you know, looking down the barrel of a gun are really interesting narratives to then explain to, you know, the rest of your employees to show that there's a lot of information out there. There's stuff we should and shouldn't be talking about. There's a lot of good stuff we can learn from the mistakes that other people have made. And I think the security awareness program too, we do a lot on the comm side, and we can be a part of this too, to help make sure that that communication doesn't break down in the process of all of this. So going back to the original question, who should be involved? The security awareness team is a really great resource because we usually are the comms people and we can help make sure everything's organized, or program management team too.
Awesome. Thanks. I just raised my hand so I could talk. But, I think it's an amazing set of perspectives we're getting from Tom and Fleetus and Jim on the actual side of doing these things. On the side of the organization, I wanted to just see what are the things that we should be thinking of in terms of how the organization should learn about it, how they should react. You know, how do we expect people to react? I think Thea might actually have ideas on how the organization reacts to these kind of things.
Yeah, so something that I would like to warn everybody of, that I'm sure a lot of cybersecurity professionals have experienced, is that you go and run something like this, which is a very proactive, very involved with your employees, etc., kind of imitation game of what you're doing. And human resources will find out that you're doing this and you haven't told them about it, and they go, excuse me, that's my thing. What are you doing? And then you suddenly get this, and all of the cybersecurity professionals I speak to get very shocked to get this huge kickback from human resources going, well, hang on a minute, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. Have you completed this? Who have you been talking to? So I would actually, my number one advice is involve them as early as possible. You don't have to involve them in your red teaming, but just to get them, as again, it's communication. I guarantee communication is going to make or break this entire thing from start to finish. And just ensure that you're communicating correctly with the right people at the right times. Just so they don't feel left out or that you're trying to hide something from them. Because that just encourages these organizational silos that end up destroying your efforts, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's so important to make that subtle distinction. You're not sharing with the organization how they're going to be attacked. You're sharing with them the fact that there's a good reason for doing this and that we're trying to do it in the most ethical way to get the best value out of it, right? Okay. So
Quickly
let's,
piggyback off of Thea, just because
yeah.
it's quick.
I'm
It's
just going to start the next poll before you
fine.
start that so everybody will know. Good.
To
Okay.
Thea's point, like emotions are key when these individuals are part of the exercise, and especially if they're not told. Like being able to help, be able to talk them back down and say, this could happen to anyone. You are the admin. Like, we don't blame you as a person. This is just a process and procedure thing. Being able to have that HR component, or what I would say debrief moment, to help make it real that they're okay. Like, because we talked about human centric security often, and I preach that all the time. You're going to have a pitfall. You're going to have a bad day. And I'm not attacking you personally for opening the door, holding the door, giving away your creds, letting me have physical access, like helping them understand these are just lessons learned. So having HR around, maybe even having a full debrief where you sit down with every individual who's impacted and just have a conversation. Like, let's just have a round table on, hey, Bob, we understand you did this. Sally, you did that, just to make it easier to reflect on it. And then you take that anonymized data and you put it into your newsletter. You have your CISO, CEO, or someone do it on their fireside chat, some way to communicate it back out. 8 of our employees were part of an exercise. This is the lessons learned. These 8 employees have been aware, they know what they've learned, and now they're your champions. Now they're your advocates. Now they can share, I've been through this, and this is how the organization treated me after the fact, and how they enabled me during the fact.
Great points. Aaron?
And I just wanted to add on that this is where, again, we're talking about communication, we're talking about transparency. It's so hard, but this is where having a truly blameless environment comes into play, because exactly what Fleeta said, this is a learning exercise. These are lessons we learned. Nobody's in trouble. We understand that people make mistakes all the time. And I think it's so important to have those conversations and not kind of talking at somebody and talking through, did you notice anything else? Did you see anything? Like, what can we do moving forward? So just wanted to add on to what Fleeta was saying.
Excellent. Feel free to come back to this topic if you want at any time, but I'm going to move, as I said, to the next poll question, which I've had active for a couple of minutes now. But the question is, what do you think are the most valuable insights red team exercises can provide for security awareness programs? And I've got a multiple choice list here of things. Maybe they're all important, and maybe you think there are other things that we don't have in this list, and you can just type that in the chat. Use the word insights to help us understand what you're commenting on. But we'll go to the next open question, which is, and maybe we've already covered some of this stuff, but just to give people ideas on how we can respond and provide ideas here. It's how can we plan ahead of an exercise to leverage its value for human risk? So is it, what are the questions that you want to ask at the beginning of the planning process to say, what are we trying to achieve? What's the timing of this thing going to look like? What are the rules of engagement that Tom mentioned? What are the kinds of things that we can do early on to get value, especially for the security awareness and human risk management side of things? So, Aaron.
Well, I was just gonna offer Fleetus wanted to go first because he
Oh,
had
sorry. Okay, yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Fleetus.
Yeah, I was going to quickly then hand it over because I would like to hear what you and Theus have to say, because I'm coming at it from the operation point. I mean, and Tom can probably attest to this. It's like quickly just understanding who is your advocate, because after a while, it can feel very lonely to do these engagements. If you don't have an advocate, especially if you're physically on site or when you're doing your recon, you can feel isolated. These are not fun engagements. So, what I would say is, to the point we talked about earlier, is having an advocate, letting someone know you're doing this so that you have the ability to share. This is the day I plan to do this. You don't have to tell everything you're doing, but at least they know the day of. Or I'm going to be on this building, or I'm going to be on this floor, I'm going to be on this subnet, to help people understand that you don't need to call the cops immediately. Let's follow our internal processes before we engage a 3-letter agency and or the police department.
Yep. Did you have anything to add to that, Aaron?
I was gonna say, so I just want to preface this by saying I've never been a part of a red teaming exercise, so there's a lot of context here that I may be missing. But one important thing to add onto that list too is, how do we work to make sure that this is successful? Accounting for that follow through, like we were just talking about. How are we going to address this after the fact? You're not gonna have all the answers. of course, you don't know what's going to happen. Are the police going to be involved? You know, are we going to break our entire system? You don't know what's going to happen, but you want to make sure that you're accounting for that follow through. You don't want to have this as an exercise, as an activity, and not have any plan to address anything afterwards.
And you always, of course, think you're going to have time to do follow up. So if you don't really plan and make the time for it, then it may not happen, right? Who is next? Tom?
Jim was.
Oh, Jim. Okay. Oh, I think Jim might be muted.
Yeah, you figure at this point I would understand how mic muting works. But I think when you sit down and you start planning what your red team engagement is, don't just limit it to the red team engagement. I think when you really sit down, to Aaron's point, you have to understand, you may not know how the red teamer got in or how I got in or how I was able to load this on your computer. Those are things you'll find out from the test, but understand, like, yes, we're going to sit down afterwards. You know, we have X number of, executives who are going to be part of the chat, who are going to understand what we're going for, how we're going to incorporate this into our trainings going forward. Also, from the standpoint of, and I believe Fleeta said this, I don't want to make the person I tricked feel bad. It was not you. You were just the easy target that, when I walked into the building, you looked like the person I was able to talk to, or, even me could be social engineered. And it doesn't matter how much skill I've had. I've done it to other people. I can catch a good number of them, but I'm not going to say I'm better than anyone else. Anyone can fall for this stuff. So to understand the beginning, middle, and end of a red teaming session, I think is important. And there's a lot of companies out there who just focus on the scope and what they're going to do. And that's their thing, is they generate a report to you and that's it. That's the end of the conversation. Is you have your report, you know how we got in, fix it. But as an organization, as someone, me, who uniquely sits on both sides of the red teaming and blue teaming side, I have to know, how do I get this into training? How do I sit down with people in the building, go, here's what you need to learn. Here's how they got in. And here's how they kind of get that edge case to weasel their way into the organization. And then, understand that they're going to be hurt, whether it's your, security team member who fell for it, or, the receptionist at the front door. Someone's going to feel a little hurt being done with that. And you have to take that human account into it. And granted, like Fleeta said, they are probably the best person ever to defend against your next one. But I think it's something organizations need to have. You can't just hire a company for a red team, get your report, wipe your hands clean of it. All right, we got the report, we're done. It's understanding how to, for lack of a better term, operationalize that data so that it's education and you stop it from happening again.
Yeah, awesome. Thea.
Yeah, so I'll just echo what everybody else said, essentially. I think follow through is very important, debrief is very important. Also, having a communication strategy before you begin for everybody that you suspect is going to be affected, before you start, so not as you go, so we don't get any surprises in there. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Aaron?
Related adjacently to this question. But I also want to think too from the security awareness perspective, is that this isn't just an opportunity to train our employees outside of security, but you might consider too, from a security awareness point, you are also responsible for training your security teams. And this is a good opportunity to start to become more involved with the security teams and seeing where their gaps are, and how, from an awareness perspective and training perspective, can I help us train better? Does that mean getting vendors to come in and train you? Does that mean having more conversations and organizing amongst the teams to talk to each other, which sometimes could be a struggle among our own teams? So just more perspective to think about the scope of your awareness program, and that it's not just your employees, but it's also your security teams too.
Yeah, and I think it's expanding certainly very quickly. You know, the whole idea of security awareness is escalating into more role-based training, right? Everybody has access to certain things that are sensitive. So, thanks, Tom.
Yeah, just to comment on what everyone else has been saying, the best red teams that I've been a part of, or I've, had some oversight on, are the ones that are planned so effectively that they understand how they're going to build in the findings from a red team into their security awareness program going forward. And they make it part of their culture. And they do so where literally they call out, or it's executives or VPs getting on a webinar with the rest of the company, talking about what they did, talking about what they're going to do to fix things going forward, and to actually like call out the fact that some people are hurt about being tested, or the receptionist at the desk, or people that felt that they've been lied to or betrayed, and like calling that out and being transparent about why we did these things. And literally in some cases, like I remember one case, I went and actually apologized to somebody that I had social engineered to get into a building, because the one executive thought, hey, it'd be a great idea just so they could see you again and you could just talk to them like face to face. And that was hard for me as a red teamer. Like, well, I don't really want to go back after I just snuck in the building. But and the person was like, oh, it's you again. And I'm like, oh no, yep, it's me. He's like, are you gonna try to get in? Nope, not gonna try to get in. But be very open and honest about that, about why we're doing the things that we do. And that really made an impact on that person of like, oh, wow, you actually came back and made an effort to like talk to me about it. And like, we need a lot more of that in organizations, to just be transparent about what's going on. Don't just hide it. And, nobody knows you're doing these things. It just really goes a long way to show that the executives and the rest of the company, they care about security. It's just so important.
Amazing. Great insight. Aaron?
Um, just from my own experience and my own stories of how amazing it is, Tom, to change somebody's perspective on the situation can make the biggest impact on not just their personal emotions, but really how much they trust the company, trust the people that they work with. And that can be a huge, I just remember similar in, we've talked about phishing simulations before. Somebody fails a phishing simulation, they are bummed. Like, nobody wants to do the wrong thing. Mistakes happen. We get that. But when you get on a conversation, I just remember being on conversations with people where they were scowling at me and so mad. And by the end of it, we were friends. And now I have this person reaching out to me, asking me questions. Like, I think Fleeta said it before, Jim said it before, like, those are your champions. When you step up from the security side and explain something to somebody, like, look, it's part of the job to do this. It's part of the job that we're going to make mistakes, but now we can talk about it. Now we know each other, and we'll try our best not to make the mistake again, but if it does, we'll still be here to catch you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm going to launch the next poll, but Cletus, you also had a comment?
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of Tom and Thea's point. Like, it's important to go back, but it's also important to share, I have fallen for similar activities as the red teamer or the blue teamer or the security practitioner. Like, when you have an all hands meeting, when you have a town hall, let the red teamer come back in, or a representative from the test share. This is what I would have expected you to ask me. Maybe ask me that next time. This is what I've expected you to see. Like that see something, say something mentality that we talk about. It's okay that you didn't see it the first time, but you're going to see it the next time. It's like the old analogy, you never see a red car or the car until you're ready to buy a car. Like if you start investigating, you want to buy this next car, you see that car everywhere. Like it's once you've got that perception, you see it. Until someone has seen it for the first time, they're never going to see it. So that's why red teaming is helpful, because it allows you to get that first image in your head. And now you see it the next time. Like you're going to see someone tailgate. You're going to see someone start to do a password stuffing. So like not reusing your password. You're going to learn these little tricks that we see in the news feeds every single day, that we see in the news, that we see from social engineers, we see from threat actors, etc. Once you've seen it the first time, you see it the second to the nth. So just learning, it's okay to talk about, I fell for that. I learned this mentality.
That's great learning. Aaron, I think next.
Fleetus, you just sparked a really good thought, or at least I think it's a good thought. But we also have a huge opportunity here to get feedback from the people who we unfortunately may or may not have tricked. But you can ask them and learn too about their job. What insecurity can we do to make your job more secure without you actually having to do any more work? Like, is there something we can add to this program? Is there something that the SecOps team can do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? We have the opportunity to not only explain ourselves, but feel like we're giving a listening ear to them and their problems and things that we might be able to help them solve that we didn't know or they didn't know before.
Amazing. Thea.
Yeah, just quickly, just to piggyback off what Fleetus was saying, like one of the values, and especially from my perspective as a neuroscientist, the value of red teaming is the realism. And it's going through the scenario that you can expect to realistically get again. But something that I'd like to point out that I know has been brought up by other psychologists that I work with is that sometimes they red team quite unrealistic scenarios. And it actually loses value because they don't connect it. If they don't visualize the scenario that you're giving them as being realistic, they don't connect it to a realistic scenario. And that actually is two different brain processes. So you lose a lot of the value of your red teaming if you do not actually employ realistic scenarios. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Thea, because I'm thinking, maybe the planning of the process, they can't find anything that they think is, easy to hack. So maybe they think, well, here's the next thing that we could go after. And maybe you're getting into the realm of the unrealistic.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that make sense, Tom?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
So anyways, I'm going to share my screen just so people can see the last poll that we had launched, and then we'll move on to our final question for the day. The last poll question was, which roles in an organization should be closely involved in planning red team exercises? Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say. We did get a number of responses, still going for a while. So the last question that I was going to put out for discussion is, how and when should you communicate the plans, the data, the findings from an exercise, and to whom? We've already talked a little bit about the communication, the planning, etc. Are there any other areas of communication or insights that are worth spending more time discussing right now around how those things happen? If not, then happy to hear more stories, either from Tom, Fleetus, Jim, anybody who's done these exercises, or even people in the chat. Fleetus.
I'll jump in real quick, and I'd love to hear Tom's feedback on this. Like, I've been in part of engagements where there's a debrief in the evening where we share, this is how far we've gotten. So you give them a roadmap to say, I've been able to get to this point. Do you want me to stop or not? Because sometimes they're going to say that's as far as we want you to go, even though your red team engagement say could be go get the crown jewels. Sometimes they're fine with you stopping there, and then they want to have a debrief, they want to have a lessons learned, and then they pivot. Other times there's other opportunities, to Thea's point, like you immediately have to call HR because you found something early on in your process that you feel like HR and or legal needs to be aware of before you continue your test, similar to a pen test. If I'm able to circumvent certain controls and I just disclose PHI, PI, or something else, let's use PCI, you may have to stop your engagement. So like learning where those triggers are in your workflow and or process to say, I have to stop and this is who I call. Sometimes red teamers, and Tom can attest, they don't want to pick up the phone. They just want to tell their boss. They just want to keep going. So you have to get the red teamer comfortable to say, I have to pump the brakes. I found something that's high enough severity that I need to stop. And sometimes they won't. So this understanding that piece of the game from the politics, the HR, the compliance side is important when it comes to these communication ages. It's like you may have to abandon your pen test. You may have to stop. And sometimes that's uncomfortable for us who are enjoying this, as Jim said. Like it's fun for those who are doing it until it's not fun. When you find something, your heart sinks too. Like you feel bad for the organization when you find something that could cause them to be brand issues, could cause legal implications, could cause them a lawsuit. You have to be comfortable knowing that that's where I have to stop.
Yeah, good points. Tom, did you have a response?
Yeah, a lot to say about that, but to make it brief, I would have to say that ethics plays a huge role into red teaming. Especially on the consultant and the tester side, right? Like there's lines that are often very tempting to cross, even when you have very clear rules of engagement that have been agreed upon. And you, as the tester, has said, "Yep, I'm not going to cross that line." But then you get into the situation, and we're like, I could cross it just a little bit, right? Like they're not really going to notice, and that's where like a lot of personal ethics, I think, just in penetration testing, ethical hacking is kind of a big deal that we don't talk a whole lot about these days. Is like you are crossing that line, and we've had some clients pretty upset with us for somebody does something. We had one instance where, cloning a badge, and they said, really, we don't want you cloning badges. Like we're keeping that out of scope. But we had somebody that just did it and said, they're going to love this badge. Look how good it is. Look how realistic. And they got mad at us because they're like, we told you don't clone the badges. And so we can't like say, well, why? Why can't we clone the badge, right? They're just saying, no, you can't do it. So don't do it. And that becomes then an ethical kind of question, right? How far do you want to cross the line? So, going back to kind of the rules of engagement, what you're agreeing to, you have to make sure that everybody understands this. And to make that phone call or to stop, it's okay to do that. It's okay to say, hey, I'm here. I see this, or I could do this. Do you authorize me to do that? And if not, if they're saying, nope, don't want you to do it, don't get upset. Just say, okay, that's cool. We're going to do this other thing. But really important to keep ethics in mind.
Amazing. Great stuff. And this is a really good timing. I'm going to just move to our wrap up. So I'm going to actually share the poll results now, which are always fun, and get the panels and the audience's responses to these poll results. So first one is what value? Oh, sorry, have you been directly involved in planning or analyzing red team exercises? So most of the people here, but 2/3 have not been involved in a red team. So hopefully this session has opened your eyes a little bit around the issues and how it relates to security awareness. The second question was, what do you think are the most valuable insights red team exercises can provide for security awareness program? Interestingly, the most was identifying human vulnerabilities that can be addressed with security training, followed by identifying process gaps, technology gaps, and demonstration of vulnerabilities. Sorry, was the first one. And then other insights, there were a few. So that's interesting. I don't think all that surprising from this group particularly. And then thirdly, which roles in an organization should be closely involved? And the CISO, number one, then followed by head of security operations, head of IT, head of HR, COO, head of service desk, etc. So those are some good insights. Any panelists have any particular comments on these? Do they look right? Is there anything that you think is indicated here? Jim?
So I'll say, depending on different organizations, that is a great structure to have when it comes to the people you talk to for a pen test, especially if there is a relationship built with them. And I selfishly say this because now I work in security, but at one point I was a help desk manager.
Mhm.
And I know Fleetus has talked about, oh, we don't want to overload help desk. And once again, even before I got in my security role, I was fine with that. The CISO of the organization would be like, hey, Jim, just by the way, we're doing this phishing test, or we're doing this red team, or we're doing this pen test, just to make you aware. And we always had an unwritten agreement like, hey, you tell me, that's great. I'm not going to tell my staff because I need to see how every part of this works. Even before security, because yeah, security teams tend to be the paranoid guys, who are like, oh, something went off and it shouldn't have gone off before. But your help desk guy may not be necessarily that paranoid. They have and I'll admit it, they had a number they had to get through every day of phone calls they got, how long they were on the phone, and could they catch something in that period of time. Same with HR, same with, your even up to your chief operating officer. It has to be built on that relationship, though, of not putting that information out. So one of the people I work with, and there was a discussion in the chat about it, when I schedule my red teamer to break into a physical location or to do something along those lines, I turn to my counterpart in my physical security branch and go, hey, by the way, don't tell your staff, but be aware on this day, this location's being hit. They're part of that conversation with me.
Yeah.
The CISO's, alerted, he knows about it, but he may not know all the details because he likes to be reactionary just like everyone else. And we've even done scenarios in which me being the link for the security operations, I've been out, quote unquote. I was watching it, I knew everything was going on, but how does my staff react? Who do they reach out to? Who is that communication chain there? What happens if you can't get a hold of your CISO or the COO or the head of IT? Like, how do these conversations work? And they're great to have them as part of that process so that everyone learns. You can't have everyone there because really anyone who's had a real security incident will tell you that it happens at the most inopportune time. It's not like, in the middle of the day and everyone's sitting around doing nothing. It's when things happen, it's weekends, it's holidays. So it's good that when you do your red team testing sometimes that you take in a real life scenario after hours, off the clock, see how someone responds, but make sure everyone who in your organization needs to know is aware, but they don't spread that information out.
Excellent. I just want to stop for a moment. We'll actually continue the discussion for the next few minutes, but I did want to let people know who are having to drop off. First of all, I want to thank Tom if he has to drop off. Really appreciate you being on. Great insights, and thanks very much for joining us, Tom.
You're welcome.
And just a quick screen share here of our next session in 2 weeks is going to be on moving from security awareness to human risk management. All kinds of things to talk about there. So we're going to come back and I'll share that with you in a minute. But for now, I think we're going to move into the insights. But I wanted to let Fleetus finish the thought from Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly recap a lot of things. It's okay to exercise different components. Like a red team can exercise a DRBCP plan. You can use them to exercise those opportunities. Like to Jim's point, like you may want to run a test when your chief officer, whatever which one, CX, is not around, just to see how that plan would operate because he or she may go on vacation before the event happens. And you want to make sure that your IRP, your incident response plan, or your DRBCP plan can be acted upon without a key resource being around. And if not, this is another lessons learned as we talked about of how you value add if my CISO, my CEO, my CO, whoever is on vacation or on a plane and they can't be reached. Like there's an opportunity to use your red teams to test your DR plans just as much as test your IRPs, your incident response plans.
That's awesome. Anybody else on any final words? Tom, did you want to share anything before you drop off?
No, just thank you so much for having me on the panel. This has been great. Love the discussion, and hopefully everyone watching and listening can take something back to their organizations.
Perfect. One of the things we like to do is just sort of recap a few insights that people have raised during the session. I think Tom's perspective was really amazing. Just first of all, from the executive support level, because you don't always get that executive support. So the more you can sort of push for it, the better. But making sure that everybody understands how you're going to build the learning from those red teams into the awareness program. Jim had some great insights on having a red teamer on staff. I didn't realize you actually full-time had people. So you shared a whole lot of other great insights, but I just noted that one. And Thea, the comments about communication planning before you actually do these things, understand what your strategy is before you start down the road of hacking the organization. And I think Aaron also pointed out some of the benefits of moving it up the chain, not just from general awareness, but role-based training, right? So making sure that people in the security team actually get some training on the lessons learned too. So those are all great things. And of course, Fleetus, you got a wealth of knowledge and experience from us. So thanks very much, everybody. Really appreciate you joining us. Did want to just sort of mention one of the things that we do here, if I can get my screen to move ahead, is from Click Armor, which sponsors and supports these sessions. We really appreciate you joining. We do want to talk to you if you're interested in learning about our product, which is gamified, highly interactive security training for all staff and for role-based training as well. We actually have a couple of quick start bundles we're offering right now for $499 up to 25 users. And for $14.99 up to 150 users for a year. So reach out to us or use the QR codes. And finally, as I said before, our next session will be on April 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it will be on the topic of moving from security awareness to human risk management. I'm starting to get my mind wrapped around this now, and I'm looking for insights, looking for anybody who wants to sort of help craft the direction of that next session. It should be a fun one. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you next time.